Let's have words. Let's have words. Say what it's all about. We're gonna say what it's about. We're gonna talk it out.
Hello and welcome to Let's Have Words. I'm your host, Lara Samuels. Hope everybody's doing well. Good to have you here this week. So Let's Have Words comes to you live every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on WWHR Internet Media. So we're here every week, and we are a talk show. So for those of you that are interested in how we became a talk show, or those of you who just want to hear the story again, we started out, Let's Have Words was actually a poetry open mic that happened every Wednesday at the Hearing Room, which was an art center in Lowell, Massachusetts. And then, of course, COVID occurred, and we went virtual for a little while, and we were doing our poetry open mic in Zoom for several weeks. And then we sort of retired it altogether. And then when it reemerged miraculously, it was a talk show. And so that's why we're here. So in our capacity as a talk show, we like to discuss many, many topics. Last week, we actually went into a little bit about Satan, so that was interesting. And then the week before that, we talked about the rising rates of depression and anxiety in teens. We talked a little bit about that. And then the week before that, we talked about green funerals, bluegrass music, you name it. So we cover a lot of topics, and sometimes we just kind of sit around and shoot the breeze, and sometimes what we prefer is to have a guest that we can talk to about something. So that's what we're doing this week. We have a guest. We have a wonderful guest this week. Our guest is Mindy Mesmer. She is a former New Hampshire state representative for District 24, and she's also, I understand, an environmental consultant and writer too. So she's going to tell us hopefully a little bit more about herself, but what I brought her on to specifically talk about tonight is that there was a cancer cluster identified in Merrimack, New Hampshire. This is Merrimack, New Hampshire behind me. It's where I work, in the town of Merrimack, and there was a cancer cluster identified there. And it potentially is associated with some industrial pollution that has occurred near a plastics factory in that town. So this is a pretty serious topic tonight. So, I mean, I first read about this cancer cluster in one of the online papers, I forget which one, but I was just floored. So, you know, maybe I'm a little bit naive. In fact, I know I am. I'm a little naive, but you know, I feel like we should have this clean water thing licked by now. I feel like, you know, it's kind of a no-brainer that we should have safe, clean drinking water. I think it's something that everybody wants. I don't think anybody's against it. So I really am at a loss to sort of explain why it is that we're still seeing industrial pollution in our drinking water. Happens more often than we would like, right? So it shouldn't happen at all, it would seem. But so I'm really curious about this and quite outraged. This is my outrage. This is me being outraged right now. I'm pretty outraged about it because, you know, it's just, to me, it just seems like something that we should have resolved a long time ago. We have the science, we have the knowledge, we have the regulatory infrastructure, we have the, you know, we know how to solve this problem, so why isn't it solved? So this is always very mysterious to me. So I will be talking to Mindy about some of those sort of more general issues regarding sort of regulation and, you know, how our water is regulated, and you know, maybe she can weigh in on her point of view as far as what is the reason that we still have contamination of our drinking water with toxins and carcinogens, right? There's no there's no excuse for this. Interestingly, so I've always been a tap water drinker because I've been lucky enough to live in places with clean, safe, and quite good tap water. And so it never occurred to me to not drink tap water. And I recently moved to New Hampshire, and the tap water here is terrible. I mean, it is, and I'm not saying it's like that all of New Hampshire. I'm just saying in my experience, this was very surprising to me because I just sort of expect tap water to be good because that's been my experience. So, I started buying. I thought I could handle it because I'm not really a particular person. I'm not finicky in any way, shape, or form, but it's just basically undrinkable. I mean, so I still cook with it, but I don't drink it because I can't. And I won't make coffee with it or anything like that, right? So I've actually, for the first time in my life, I've started to buy filtered water. I buy the big 5-gallon jugs that you can, return, and then, that's a major expense. First of all, it's pretty expensive for me, and also it's a pain in the butt, right, to lug these giant 5-gallon jugs of water everywhere, right? So I don't like it. I don't want to do it. I went to the to read the water report online, and everything looks good. All the boxes are checked. Everything is, all the levels are fine, according. But then why does it taste like shit? I just don't. It doesn't. It doesn't compute, right? So I still have yet to figure out why my water is so awful, but it's incidents like this that really are quite jarring to me because, well, first of all, nobody should have to drink unsafe water, but also it makes me even more suspicious of my own water at home too. So, all right, not a pleasant topic, but an important one to discuss. So I'll be talking with Mindy a little bit about this particular issue and also maybe some of the wider questions about how water is regulated and what are the laws in place to protect us and that sort of thing, and what can be done, what can we do if we are having an issue, and also, but mostly I do want to talk about this particular cancer cluster that was discovered in Merrimack, New Hampshire, and just some of the get the story on that, get the scoop on that. So that's the main topic tonight. So if you would like to join the conversation, we are not having call-ins tonight, so people can't come on with their video. But if you have questions and comments, please just put them in the chat, and we will work them into the conversation. In fact, here's a comment right here. If I work in Merrimack, have you been drinking the tap water there? Yes, I have, Ronnie. Thank you very much for asking. I have been drinking the tap water. Yeah, I go to the sink and fill up my little, glass water container, and I drink the water there. So anyway, and I don't know if it's all, I don't know if this is contaminating, how much of Merrimack's water is contaminated. I don't know how widespread it is. Anyway, we will find all of those details out, hopefully, but thank you for your question. All right, so I think I'm ready to bring Mindy on so we can have this conversation. Hi there.
Hi, how are you?
Welcome to Let's Have Words.
Thanks for having me.
Good.
I heard your little intro. It's an important topic.
Yeah,
so
it's great.
Glad to be here.
It is. And it really just, I feel like this is something we should have licked. We should have this resolved, and it's so frustrating to me that we don't. The post Clean Air Water Act, Clean Air and Clean Water Act, in this day and age, we're still dealing with this kind of stuff. It just blows my mind, really. But
Yes.
That's just because I'm naive. I'm sure you have a more intricate understanding of all of the reasons why this is not the case. But why don't you give us a little bit of a background, because you have a long history of working with this sort of thing.
Right.
So, so what's your background?
Yeah, I'm an environmental scientist, have been for a long time,
Yeah.
and was minding my own business and doing my work and bringing up two wonderful boys a few years ago when in my own town here in the seacoast of Rye, New Hampshire, I started to get all these calls from moms that knew me in town saying, have you seen the reports about these kids getting cancer in our town? And I did, and was looking at it, and they said, do you think there's an environmental issue in our town? Now, I came to Rye from Portsmouth, and I had always had concerns about Portsmouth's water, and understandably so. We all kind of know what's happened in Portsmouth. Hopefully, there's a base there, a former Air Force base that contaminated the water supply in Portsmouth. And that's still ongoing now. But moving to Rye, everybody said, oh, the water's pristine in Rye and all this stuff.
Right.
So actually, I reported that cancer, the high rate of children with cancers, to the state in 2014. And 2 years later, the state called me and another mom to the library in town and said, yep, you're right. It is a cancer cluster. There are kids with really high rates of two kinds, not just one, two kinds of these rare cancers. And so that got me into this whole arena of the state didn't really want to do much about it. And I kind of, exposed it to the media because the people in my town were worried about it and they knew something had to be done. So kind of promote, I became an advocate for clean water, used my scientific background to push for action. So I come from a town in which there are kids that are literally dying of these rare cancers. Get to the state house. I was asked to actually run for the house. I never would have thought to do it myself. Ran for state office, won. And I knew
because of
I
this
had to
issue,
do.
because
Absolutely.
of this is what made you make that decision. I see.
Yep.
Yeah.
And on the edge of my town, there's this site called Coakley Landfill, Superfund site.
Right.
And I kind of remembered it in the back of my mind for a long time. And I was really shocked, as you are right now, to hear that this decades-old Superfund site was still polluting the water in my town and four other towns around the dump. So, that just enraged me. And like you, I was upset. I went to the State House and worked on these important issues. Now, these chemicals that are coming out of the Saint-Gobain factory in Merrimack are called Pfas. They're like Teflon. They make those Teflon pans from. So they are forever chemicals. And that's good if you want your Teflon pan to last forever, or if you want to cook something at a really high heat. But it isn't good for your body, and it isn't good for the environment. So when these chemicals get in the environment and in your body, we don't know how to get them out. And for decades, the manufacturers of these chemicals have known the health effects associated with these chemicals, which includes cancer and birth defects and things like that. Wow. But we were kept in the dark. So that's kind of why we're still in the position that we're in right now, because the manufacturers and the EPA and those people, they knew there were problems, but we didn't know about it until recently. So I actually found out about these chemicals for the first time as a consultant working on a Navy base in Maine. And they are used in these foams that are used to put out fires. They're called AFFF, aqueous film forming foams. And they're really good at putting out these airplane fires or, turned over truck fires and things like that. But the foams are what pollute the water supply in Portsmouth. Those are the same components that Saint-Gobain uses in their plant in Merrimack. They use it to coat fabrics for firefighters. They use it to coat things like the domes that are the sport domes or the radar domes used by the defense industry, or they use them for chemical protective tents that the Army and things use to protect the people from chemical warfare agents. So they are important chemicals, but they've been using them for decades. They came here, Saint-Gobain came to New Hampshire, to Merrimack in 2000 or so from Vermont. Right after they left Vermont, or in the process, Vermont found out they polluted Vermont as well too. So there's a big thing going on similarly in Bennington, Vermont around these chemicals. Saint-Gobain came here to Merrimack. ChemFab, though, had been using that facility since, I think, 1986. So there's been a long history in this location of pollution to the air. Yeah. And so what happened is they use these chemicals to coat fabrics and things inside the plant, and then they go up the stacks and out into the air. And so the chemicals rained down all over southern New Hampshire and polluted the water supplies, private wells and public wells in the area of Saint-Gobain. And several times, we're still finding out the true extent of the pollution caused by this. They did have to put in some kind of air emission treatment system in the past few months. It was a big, long process. They tried not to do it several times. They were pushed into it by law. But, you know, we do have to change things. I mean, you see how I have a bottled water thing in my house too,
Yeah, that's
because
exactly
our water.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and interestingly enough, just like a side story about that, if you don't mind, is
Yeah, no, go
in
ahead.
2017, when I was a state rep, I realized that in New Hampshire, you could buy bottled water that didn't have to adhere to the same stricter regulations that your municipal water supply had to abide by. So I put in a bill that got denied, got kicked out twice, two years, three, I think it was three times. It was tried to get passed, and all of a sudden the state of New Hampshire filed what's called rulemaking to make sure that these bottled water companies who sell water in New Hampshire do have to abide by those laws. But it was really surprising to me. So the first year I put it in, I brought it up and I brought it to the legislature and I said, this is bad. You know, why can I buy bottled water from New Jersey and it'll have less arsenic in it than the water I buy here in New Hampshire from the bottled water supplies?
Yeah.
And so what they did is they went out and they bought a bunch of bottled water and they sampled it and they found really high levels of PFAS in some cases in these
Wow.
bottled water supplies. So you can't always depend on bottled water. That's why I work so hard to protect our tap water systems and our private wells, you know, in New Hampshire. So I know I spouted out a lot of stuff.
Oh,
here,
no,
but...
that's okay. No, that's great. No, that's wonderful because you're just a wealth of information on this particular issue. And no, I appreciate all of your knowledge. I was wondering, so first of all, how was the cancer cluster originally identified? Like, how does that even happen? Like, who identifies these clusters? Are these just, you know, independent researchers, or is there somebody that is charged with finding them, or how was it found? Do you know?
Unfortunately, the way it happens in New Hampshire is we have what's called a cancer registry.
Yeah.
And literally all they do is they count the cases every year. And that, I think, I don't know the exact year that was started, but
right.
Until someone like you or I say, hey, there's a lot of kids with this kind of cancer in my town, can you check into it? And it took 2 years. Nobody really monitors that.
Really? So people are just putting all this information in a database, it's there, and anybody can access it, but somebody would actually have to take the initiative to look into it.
And so that's how this issue came about with Merrimack in the recent, last couple of weeks. We have a commission that was formed by one of the bills that was written by a friend of mine, that we are now sitting on this commission that looks at the Merrimack issue. We have a couple of different ones that look at these issues, but because of outcries from the public, from people that lived in the Merrimack area and people on the legislature that, were fighting for these things. In 2018, the state issued a report that looked at the cancer rates in Merrimack. They concluded there was nothing to see here, which I disagree with. And in a couple of weeks, you'll probably find out more about that.
Okay.
But
yeah, this is a really recent, this is all coming out.
Yes,
now,
it's
right
all
now.
unfolding now.
Yeah, unfolding.
When they did that 2018 look, it's been 5 or 6 years. So every 5 years they can do an assessment, they say, is what they have to wait 5 years. So we were pounding them to do another assessment for 2 years. Right. Finally, we made them do it, and they came to a commission with a report a couple of weeks ago and said, in this next set of data, so I think it was 2009 to 2018, there are high rates of kidney cancer. Now, part of the problem is all of us think that the method isn't that great because they compare the rates of the Merrimack people to the state of New Hampshire. And the reason I don't like that is because I found actually in the last few years, New Hampshire has the highest rate of children's cancer in the nation. New Hampshire has the highest rate of breast cancer, esophageal cancer, all these cancers, much higher than the rest of the nation, the highest in the state, in the country. So when you compare those rates to an already high rate, it's going to be really hard to find that difference. We don't want to compare it to a dirty place. We want to compare it to a cleaner place.
That makes sense. Of course.
So
it's going to skew the data. Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of what happened, and that's what you'll hear about in the next few weeks a little bit more from me about that.
So some people are denying that this cluster even exists.
Actually, now the state is admitting that the kidney cancers are elevated.
How many cases are we talking about? Approximately.
Let me look. I have the report open right here. There were supposed to be 66. There's supposed to be 46 cases in that time frame in Merrimack. There are actually 66 cases.
I see.
So, but that's just one kind of cancer. there's a lot of these cancers that are very borderline.
Mm-hmm.
Like even if I were to write this, I would say those were statistically significant, like colon cancer, Hodgkin lymphoma. There's a couple of them, non-Hodgkin lymphoma. There's a couple that are borderline that are elevated as well.
I see.
So when you compare those rates to already high rates in the rest of the state,
Yeah.
it's hard to see that. So I bet if you compared them someplace else, you would see a significant
Much
difference.
higher. Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, is the cancer cluster has it been definitively connected to Gobain, or is it just a correlation, or is there evidence that for sure that the PFAs and the cancer cluster are related, or?
Well, one of the things that, I said that we haven't known for decades about these chemicals and the cancers they cause. A few years ago, it was uncovered that in West Virginia, a town which had a big DuPont facility, that people had high rates of kidney cancer. So the courts determined that there was a probable link between exposure to PFAS and kidney cancer.
I see.
So this actually is one of the ones that are, I'm sure if you ask the state of New Hampshire, they'll say, well, we can't tell if they're directly related to the St. Gobain facility or not. But, for me, knowing that kidney cancers have been by a court of law already determined to be probably linked to PFAS exposure, I would assume that that's in part contributed to these cases.
Makes sense.
It can't, maybe it's not every single case, but,
Right.
We'll never know that though.
Of course not.
There's
Right.
no way to know that. So yes, I would say this of the cancers, this is the more definitive one
Yeah.
that we can say is tied to
The PFAS.
probable PFAS exposure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so how were the PFAS found? Was that just like routine testing of the water? They just how did they find them to begin with?
I'm going to guess, I don't know this for sure, but
Yeah.
in Portsmouth, there was an EPA effort several years ago in 2014 to look for across the nation these PFAS chemicals in the water systems. It's called the UCMR rule. They go out and they make water suppliers sample for the chemicals. That's how they found them in Portsmouth. The finding in Merrimack happened right after that, or about a year or so after that. So I want to think that they probably thought, maybe we should look for them here too. Or maybe EPA even came in and said to look for them in the water supply.
I see. Yeah. So PFAs, from what I understand, are extremely. I mean, why aren't they banned? Like, why? I mean, okay. I know is there an alternative to using them in some of these products, or that's just the only, or what is maybe they shouldn't be banned. I don't know, but is there a reason why?
Well, European countries are moving to ban them.
Yeah.
And, the problem with these chemicals is they're so widely used now. I mean, they're in everything from food wrappers you get at McDonald's that,
Really?
they're in makeup. A good colleague of ours has found them in really high levels in waterproof mascara, things like that anything that's waterproof, basically, I think has PFAS in it.
Right. Because that's the property that it has that makes it
Yes.
so dangerous too, right?
Right.
And makes it last so long. The fact that it's like
Exactly.
a forever chemical.
That's right.
Because
Forever
of its
chemical.
properties. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, there are now, I mean, I have, this is like a rolling, I have to keep up with the ball, but right now there are more than 12,000 of these PFAS chemicals. So it's PFAS, it's a big umbrella of these kind of chemicals. 12,000 of them now are known to us. We regulate in the state of New Hampshire only 4 of them. There's some legislation probably coming in this fall that will look to add a few more of those. But when you look at 4 versus 12,000 chemicals that are regulated, I mean, that's a lot of chemicals. And we're constantly playing a whack-a-mole game of trying to keep up with the manufacturers that create these chemicals. Because what they do is they see us coming and they say, well, you're going to start regulating these possibly. So we're going to take off a few carbons here, whatever, they change the structure. So then they get around calling them the same exact thing. No.
Oh my God. So they they just pop off a couple, I guess the F stands for fluoride. So they just pop off a couple of those and fluorine. Yeah. They just, and now it's a different chemical.
Yes. So that's where we're at.
Shenanigans.
I mean, yes. And, so we tried to get the state to regulate them as a structural group. We said, all right, we know plenty of these are bad for us.
Right.
Let's just call them all what they are. put them in one group and let's regulate all of them. And that was our attempt to basically ban
Makes
them.
sense, yeah.
But that was entirely turned down by our state regulators. So with not even a one-page letter of refusal. So
why is the state so you mentioned before about this Coakley site in where you live, and you said you called the state and they didn't want to do it. Why is the state so lethargic? Why don't they act? Do you know? I mean,
I want to make it
that?
clear that, there's a lot of really good people that work in our state agencies. There are people like me who really care about things. The problem is the upper echelons of those agencies are, for whatever reason, don't want to act or don't act the way we'd like them to. So that's where we all come in, and we have to voice our concerns. The importance of people being involved in the legislature, I can't overstate enough how important it is for people to say, I want clean water, to go to these, legislative hearings and voice their opinions, send emails, send letters, make phone calls, because then it puts the pressure on those legislators not to listen to the industry lobbyists who come in and they fight against every step we try to take. I got to tell you a really funny story, which isn't funny, but so when last session,
dark comedy
it's a dark comedy.
Okay.
During the last session, as an example of this, the American Chemistry Council came in to oppose one of the bills I was helping out with, and they called these PFAS chemicals sort of like berries. The woman's like, these PFAS chemicals are like berries. Some are good for you, some are bad for you. So we have to figure out which ones are good and which ones are bad.
Are you kidding me?
I'm not kidding you. I have it on tape.
That's insane.
I can share it with you.
Wow.
So that's the kind of stuff that these people say that, when you and I are sitting there saying, oh my goodness, are you kidding me? That's what makes the difference when there's eyes on these people, when there's ears on these people, and we're telling them to do what we want them to do, not listen to the ACC when they say these outrageous things. Because we care about the people in our state. We don't want to be known for the top, the state with the top rate of pediatric cancer.
Of course not.
How's that for bringing young families in?
Right. No, it's definitely not something you want to be known for. Yeah. So what are I guess I have a little bit of an understanding of the regulatory, hierarchy, so who are all could you explain a little bit about sort of all of the agencies that are involved in making sure that we have clean water? Besides, so you got the EPA,
the federal,
the federal level.
Yep. And so, and then we have our state Department of Environmental Services.
Okay.
And we have our state Department of Health and Human Services. For whatever reason, those guys are split and very siloed most of the time, which is one of the issues we tried to deal with in one of our commissions.
Why do we have two? So we have two separate agencies, and they both are regulating the water supply.
DES, Department of Environmental Services, they actually, do the regulations for the water.
Yeah.
The Department of Health and Human Services does like the cancer evaluations.
I see.
And it doesn't make sense to me that they would be as siloed as they are. I want them to be working together more to figure these things out.
Right.
So that's what one of our commissions is trying to do. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll say, we don't have the money to do all this stuff, so the feds have to take care of it. And then the feds haven't made a strict enforceable drinking water standard since 1976. So the feds are not doing anything. So that leaves us here in the state, which luckily, we have this very active representative democracy here in our state, where we have 400 state legislators, we have 24 state senators. So we do have a lot of power as people in the state of New Hampshire to really make sure that things happen. And so what's happening is that we will put these legislative proposals in, and oftentimes, astoundingly, they're difficult to get through, where you and I would say, this is just a no-brainer, like you were saying in your intro.
Yeah.
It's just, it's very frustrating. So here in New Hampshire, not only do we have these PFAS chemicals, but we have a big problem with arsenic in our water, which is naturally occurring.
Right.
And in Merrimack, in fact, they had some issues with arsenic historically as well, which is probably part of what the bladder cancer numbers are. But I did put through some legislation. Now New Hampshire has some of the strictest drinking water standards for arsenic. But during the process of that legislative working through the committees, one of the state representatives was asked by one of my colleagues, how come if you knew this was a problem 12 years ago, you knew that this bladder cancer rate was so high, we have the highest rate in the country, why didn't you do something about arsenic? And they said, well, I guess we didn't have a scientific legislator that made us do it. And, you know, so this is where we're at. So this is why it's so important for us to be
For
involved.
people to get involved.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are very trusting that things are operating in their interest, but they're clearly not. Like, we need people like you. I mean, it sounds like you're one of you got involved. You were doing your thing, like you said. you were just hanging out, doing your environmental science, and then next thing you know, you're running for a state rep. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, it really is. And it sounds like you got a lot accomplished, or at least you tried to get a lot accomplished.
Yeah, no,
and you did get a lot accomplished during that time. And that really shows people what one person can do. I mean, about, you know, people are up against these you know, industry lobbyists and things like that, and they have all the power, and they know how it all works, and they know, you know, so people do have to get involved, you know.
Yep. And you know, so you still can. I mean, I'm still involved, heavily involved.
Yeah. What are you doing now? Are you
in the legislature?
Yeah, you're on this commission still, or?
Yeah, I'm actually on like 5 commissions, I think.
5 commissions.
That
just
are
5?
4 or
Come
5.
on, Mindy.
Yeah. But they're all like looking at, you know, the cancer in the Seacoast, the Merrimack Commission. They're looking at ways to come up with a system so that we don't have to wait for someone like me to report a cancer. We want that to be surveilled on a general basis.
It's shocking to me that is not already the case. That there's not somebody whose job it is to, like, you know, monitor these things, you know. I mean, it's
I'm shocked too. But
so
we have to fix it.
Yeah, and it sounds like you are fixing it. I mean, this commission is taking some steps to fix it. So that's
the commission's important. There's a lot of different ways, and I also formed New Hampshire Safe Water Alliance with a few people in 2016, which is a group of people actually started on Facebook, and those people are very active in supporting. You know, I'll send out make sure you send an email by Friday at 5 p.m. to all the state senators about this, and we have a tool that we set up, and we can get a lot of people that get involved in that kind of a thing, and it makes a big difference. So that New Hampshire Safe Water Alliance is still very active with legislative stuff. I also formed New Hampshire Science and Public Health a few years ago when the pandemic started. That's a nonprofit that we are trying to advance scientific stuff in New Hampshire to protect people's public health. So there's a lot of ways people can get involved. You don't have to be elected. You don't have to be a scientist. You can learn on your own, and you can be involved with advocacy efforts that are really important.
Yeah. So I did have a question. So just getting back to the to Merrimack just for a minute. So somebody asked, we had a question. So these aren't pediatric cases in Merrimack, right? Are they adult cases of renal
We
cancer?
don't know actually the answer. I asked that question. So all we have right now is a table of cancers. Yeah. And they're all cancers. The pediatric cases aren't split out. So we don't know. And that's one of the things that the commission is going to try and resolve in the coming weeks. In fact, these commission meetings, I keep mentioning them, but they are public meetings. So the public can, and I really encourage people to come to these meetings. If you want to learn more, if you want to just observe, you can't usually speak, although now there's a public input section of it. Or if you want to talk to the commission about your concerns, you could do that now. But it's important to understand how these things are happening.
Yeah, definitely. So what does Gobain say? Like, what is their excuse? Like, do they have a defense? They're being sued. What's their defense? Do you know what their defense is?
Well, I mean, like any company, they don't want to spend the money, and they certainly will not want to be associated with causing cancer in people. So that part of it is, you know, ongoing. Still, there's actually more than one lawsuit. There's several lawsuits against them. And, you know, the frustrating thing was they were, you know, public pressure, the commission pressure against them to make sure that the state made them put those air emissions controls on was a very long process. And they still tried to get out of it in so many ways, just basically saying, well, no, we're not going to do it, even though we're compelled to do it. So they were 6 months later or something like that. actually installing those devices on the stacks. And then they tried to put, I don't know if you saw the reports, but we found out they put a side stack on to get emissions out before it just, it's like putting an extra tailpipe on your car so you can avoid the catalytic
that's
converter.
exactly analogous to that, right?
Yeah. So, and that's what I said to the press,
avoid
which was
good
for people to understand what they did. So like every step of the way, we have to keep the pressure on, because otherwise they just get away with it.
How widespread is this? So
that's the other thing.
Is this problem?
So the problem is we don't know yet.
Yeah.
And part of that is because of the stepwise nature that this is happening.
Yeah.
Part of the reason is because I identified during one of our meetings that the state wasn't complying with the law in terms of notifying people. So there's a law that says the state has to let you know if you live within 500 feet of somebody who has a contaminated well. So here in New Hampshire, let me just say this for a second. So there's a public water supply in Merrimack, but there's also people who have their own wells. And people that have their own wells, which comprise about 40% of the state, they don't have as much knowledge as a water survey, a guy that runs the water systems. So they also don't have their water tested necessarily for the same things. They're not regulated like a public water supply is. So that's really important, because there's about 40% of the people who live in that area that have private wells. So they don't know. Some people don't even know this is going on at all, like if they don't pay attention to the news. So the state wasn't letting people know within the law that in some cases that their neighbor's well was contaminated. So that I identified that during one of our commission meetings and pointed it out, and then it became a big thing. And then they said, oh yeah, we've got to do that. So they went back about 2 months ago, and they sent like 6,000 letters out to people in the area, notifying them, blanket notification. We may not have told you. So now we're in the process of getting those thousands of people sampled into the system. So the whole process has been so slow. And for a number of reasons, it's been that slow. So we don't really know yet. Then when the regulations that were part of my bill went into effect, they were much more strict. So that made the size of the problem bigger too. But it was always the problem anyway, just that the regulations were changed. So they made them more strict and hopefully safer for people.
Right. Wow. I mean, this is just, this is amazing. And this is, like you said, this is unfolding right now. So we're going to hear a lot more about this coming out in the next couple weeks, even just get, just more information about this. So, I wanted to ask about, I wonder about when I go, for instance, when I look at my water report, I go on to and I look through it, and it says, everything is within normal limits. Should I believe that?
Are you a private well owner?
I am not. I'm on the
public water supply.
Public water supply. Yes.
Well, if it's a public water supply report and it has PFAS on it and it says that's within levels, then you can probably assume that it is. The problem has been here is that we didn't have levels. So the water supplies didn't have to sample for the stuff until recently. So I'm not sure if you live in Merrimack or not, but hopefully your water system is now up to speed with this. I don't know what system you are in, but but the problem is that it doesn't cover some of the water system. So if you live in a neighborhood and you've got 5 houses or something, and there's a water supply well in your neighborhood that supplies, that may not apply. So you may not know. So if you live in that kind of a situation, I would strongly encourage you to have your water sample, go to whoever runs that little water system and say, I want to know if this is in there. So, but if you're on a big public water supply system, it's pretty certain that they've probably come up to speed by now. Yeah.
Okay. Because I just wonder about I don't know. I'm a very trusting person, and I've always, I read the report. It said everything was fine, but now, you hear about this kind of stuff, and you think that there's a lot of manipulation potentially, and I don't know. I just, I'm nervous about it. That's all.
Well, and if you have any questions, we're happy in New Hampshire Safe Water Alliance on Facebook. people put, they'll direct message me, or they'll put their results up on there, and we say, yeah, this is what this is, or whatever. So,
Right.
we offer a lot of help to other people to
Right.
help understand the issue.
Right. All right. So, people, we are talking to Mindy Mesmer, and a wealth of information. She's a former state representative for New Hampshire, and as well as a writer and consultant. You write too, right? And I think I read at least one of your articles out there about the rye situation. So, are you a regular?
Yeah.
Do you have a regular publication that you do, or a blog?
No, I write a lot of letters to the editor, but
Yeah.
I also now just wrote a novel.
Oh.
And it's coming out in April, hopefully,
Oh.
maybe, unless Omicron has an effect on that. But
That's
it's called
exciting.
Female Disruptors.
Yeah. What's
And
that
it's about female scientists and women that make change.
Oh, wow. And this is
It's about my history.
based on your experience? Is it autobiographical somewhat?
It's
Yeah.
it's
In
about
part.
some of the issues that, I worked on, and then about other people too.
Oh, that
But
sounds great. So it's coming out when again? April, you said?
April, maybe May now with Omicron. We don't know if it's going to impact the schedule, but
Yeah, yeah.
it'll be on Amazon.
So,
So.
is this, have you written novels before? Is this your first novel?
It's my first novel.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's fabulous. And so you must have been working on it for a while.
Yes, not as long as you would think. But yes, about 9 months probably.
9 months. Wow.
Yeah.
So so a novelist as well. We'll just add that to the list of things. And we're talking primarily about the cancer cluster that was found in Merrimack, New Hampshire, and its potential, or I guess pretty much established connection to Gobain plastics factory that's letting PFAs, which are nasty chemicals, out into the environment, and all of the issues surrounding that. So if you guys have questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will work them into the conversation. So, all right, so you already talked a little bit about what people can do, as far as getting involved. But like, what do you think are the sort of the levels of involvement that people can do? Like if they're concerned about this issue.
Well, I mean, first is to do things like this, to listen in and figure out and learn about things, to be informed about them.
Yep.
To research a little bit more about things if you want to know about them, to get involved with a group like ours or others that, are there sort of to help other people. And like I said, there are things that are coming up all the time in the legislature that, if you want to call your state representative or send emails or be part of those kinds of efforts, it's really easy to do. We make it super easy for people to do that. We have like a tool. All you have to do basically is go in and put your name in and your address, and it sends it for you.
Yeah.
And we do that at various times when it's when it needs to be done, depending on what the process is in the legislature. Talk to your representatives about how you feel about it beforehand, even when the legislator isn't probably thinking about any specific legislation, if you want, so that they become informed too, because, informing everybody else is part of the process, is, making people understand the importance of this, even when it's not actively going through the legislature, is important too. The governor's an important person to make sure he puts his signature on those important bills as they get to his desk. So telling him what you think about it too by calling his office is a good thing to do. And just stay abreast of it. I was just on a national call this morning, and I was surprised to hear the FDA talking about PFAS. They were actually talking about the need to look at PFAS in food wrappers, I mentioned earlier. I knew they were kind of doing something about it but to hear Janet Woodcock bringing it up in a national conference was interesting.
Yeah.
So it's a big issue that most people, look at ways to reduce your exposure potentially to these chemicals as much as you can. Don't get things with paper that doesn't get wet, because that means it has PFAS in it.
Right.
Try not to use waterproof mascara. There's lots of ways you can reduce your, because what we want to get to, the plan is really to be precautionary.
Yeah.
To not expose everybody to chemicals when we don't know if they're safe, take precautions to prevent people from getting sick in the first place. So
Yeah, in my perfect world, it would seem like, that chemicals should be guilty until proven innocent, not the other way around. It
right.
seems like these things have been around since what, like the 40s or 50s or
Yeah.
something, and we've been using them for a long time. And I understand that in the past, we didn't have as much knowledge, but you'd think now, there would be something that would prevent them from being produced until they're proven to be safe,
Yeah.
Are there any alternatives to PFAs, like something that would be, work in water? We can still, so where consumers can still have their waterproof mascara, but doesn't have PFAs in it. It has like some kind of natural beeswax or something.
Well, that things like that are,
Yeah.
that came to light because a scientist did the work and published it.
Yeah.
We don't really know what of those, which ones, what brands he did the samples on,
Right.
we don't know, but that's one of the things that we do to try to get some change to happen, like a catalyst to have something happen.
Yeah.
So scientists will do that. They'll do, like we're doing, and you'll see it soon. We're doing things to sort of be the catalyst to make something happen. And so it's not as full of an analysis of, what you can do, of what you could buy, whatever brand mascara versus this brand,
Right.
Yet. But hopefully that will happen. So the things we know about are, to be cognizant of what's in your water supply, which we know we can test now, and try not to use food wrappers and things like that may have PFAS in it. I'm worried about some of the other products, like maybe waterproof sunscreens. I want to see some work on that to see if those have PFAS in them as well. Yeah. Unfortunately, we're in the dark, and the companies know and have known for decades what products have these things in them and what don't. And we have to catch up on it. I neglected to say our federal representatives here in the state of New Hampshire have been extremely proactive on these issues too.
Yeah.
And so talking to them about how you think it's important is also another thing. They're constantly, doing legislation in Washington, and, hopefully some of them are pressuring the EPA to actually do things with respect to these chemicals. We're not as happy with what we've seen in the recent couple of months. We had hoped that there would be some good action federally in EPA, but we're not seeing it yet. So pressuring people is a good way to get things done there too.
Yeah. So lots of potential avenues for change, sounds
Absolutely.
like. And definitely some movement on this, so that's awesome. So the PFA, is it like the reason we don't know exactly what product does this fall under trade secrets or something like
Exactly.
that? Do they say we can't disclose which products have these in them because of
and
trade
even
secrets? Is that the
absolutely
reason? Wow.
Yeah. And so interestingly, I started to really look at St. Gobain very closely, and I got my hands on, actually made a right to know request and got some of their raw product, which was all redacted, but I saw that they buy their raw product from Commerce, because you could look through the paper and see it. So, that's the kind of stuff you have to do. And unfortunately they hide behind this. And there's also a difference between what we would consider to be PFAS free and what they consider to be PFAS free. When they say PFAS free, I believe it can have up to 10% PFAS in it still, which is, when you look at parts per trillion levels, which we're worried about causing people to get sick.
Yeah.
And they can have 10% or so, or maybe 9% of PFAS in the raw materials that are used. That's a very high number still. So I've been, pushing that too, and in all sorts of places. Like, we have to do something about that, because that's,
Right.
They can't hide behind that, trade secret stuff.
Right. One of our listeners was asking, I think you might have addressed this a little bit, but there's no list of like items that contain PFAS at this point, but there may be in the future. We may be able to
there's
have some labeling or something, or access a list.
There was a list of, somebody had done it, said like something like 2,000 products had PFAS. That was a couple of years ago though. Like I said, this is an evolving issue. So we're finding more and more like makeups and things like that. Environmental Working Group has a lot of good information for consumers on PFAS. So if you go to their website, I think it's ewg.org, and you search on PFAS, I think they have at least what we know now, or have known in the past, pretty reliably what things have PFAS in them. But things like ski wax and things like that also have PFAS in them, we found. So it's just one of those things where it's popping up everywhere, or a lot of places.
Yeah. So, so what about how do PFAS compare to others? So we have a question from a listener. How do PFAS compare to other chemicals like mercury, like lead and mercury, in terms of how they're treated, or some of the known toxins that we're very much aware of, like arsenic you mentioned, and I mean, are they?
Well,
do they fall under the same sort of regulation, or are they just are they
no, you have
they're
to,
just monitored, or they're
you have to regulate all of them separately.
right?
And
Okay.
when they're naturally occurring, it's a lot easier to get regulations passed than if Saint-Gobain uses them in their practice and they don't want them to go get regulated. So there's a lot of lobbying pressure. So a lot less lobbying pressure against the arsenic bills that I got through.
Yeah.
We had a lot of pushback on the lead bill we had, which is a big problem in New Hampshire, by the way. There's a lot of lead toxic children in New Hampshire. And we really need to make sure that I was a co-sponsor of a bill that required kids 0 to 1 and then 1 to 2 to be screened for lead. Yeah. And the compliance rates are really poor in New Hampshire, scary poor. Yeah. And we know I think last year there were like 680 kids that are lead toxic in the state of New Hampshire,
oh my God,
which is entirely avoidable. So we like to think that we know about these things,
right,
but it's a slog to try to get the right thing to happen. But when there's industry involved, it's very hard to get regulations passed.
So New Hampshire compared to other states is just pretty nasty. I mean, we have in terms of you're saying that we had the super high cancer rates, and we have the yeah. I mean, compared to other states where we would be way down the list as far as
for cancer,
a healthy place to live.
I'm happy to say though that now we have the strongest protections in our water for arsenic. We have the strongest protections for these for PFAS.
Right.
Some of the states now are sort of beating us now. Yeah. So we need to update them a little bit now. But but that just speaks to the informed population getting involved, and we can change these things if we all get involved.
That's right. All right, so I just wanted to ask, so I think we talked a little bit about the solution, like potential solutions and what people can do. Just once again, so Mark can maybe put it on the screen, where would you go, like what are some websites or something, you already mentioned a couple of them, that people can go to get more information about this?
Yep. Environmental Working Group is one where they can get information on products. You can go to our Facebook page, New Hampshire Safe Water Alliance, which there's a page that's an outward-facing sort of news about lots of these things. Then there's a group you can ask to join, which will let you in, and you can ask questions in there. People will be happy to help you. There are, where else can you? Certainly paying attention to the legislature. There are calendars that come out, so you know what legislation is moving through the House and the Senate, and hopefully to the governor's desk if it's good stuff.
So those calendars are on that site?
They're on New Hampshire General Court website. You look up NH General Court. You can see all the calendars that have all the legislation that's moving through the state legislature there. Yeah. And we do put, in New Hampshire Safe Water Alliance, we'll put some of those notifications up in there that have to do with environmental stuff that we're thinking about. New Hampshire Science and Public Health has a Facebook page as well, where we put out information on the pandemic and, cancer and all this stuff. So that's a good place to get information too. And we're on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and I'm trying to think. I can't think of another place right this second. If I come up with something, I'll let you know.
Okay. No, that's a good place to start. Those are some good suggestions for resources for sure. So anything that we didn't mention that you think is important for people to know, that that's on your mind that we didn't really talk about, or
We kind of mention it as the lead issue with kids. You know, it's
Yeah.
important to have your kids screened for
Yeah.
lead because that's an entirely preventable exposure. We know it's, you know, lead toxicity is very damaging to children, especially at young ages, but also PFAS is. We think that, you know, arsenic and PFAS and lead are kind of similar in what they do to babies and children. So all of this is good to make sure you keep away from kids and your drinking water. If you have a private well, and you have questions, you can call the state and ask. They have a hotline, I think they do still. Ask them about things. There's, you know, Granite State Analytical is a web-based platform for a lab that is actually really good for residential customers. If you have a private well and you want to find out what's in your water, go to that website. I don't make anything from telling you guys this. I just really like them and I really like their site.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
really easy for residential people too. So if you want to find out what's in your well for arsenic, you get a package they'll send you. They'll tell you how to do it. You send it back to them. And, you know, all these things except for PFAS are pretty inexpensive too. So it's so worth it. You know, especially with things like arsenic, I think it's like $30 to find out if there's arsenic in your well. And it's so, you know, the bladder cancer rates in New Hampshire are sky out of control. And, you know, it's important to know what's in your water. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I feel, I mean, I just am so grateful that there are people like you that, you know, really take this stuff seriously and are so committed to making change. Just, I mean, thank you for
thank you for
doing
having
all
me
of
on.
that, doing all of that stuff. I mean, it's amazing. And I can't wait to check out your new novel when it comes out. I'll be looking for it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. It'll be on Amazon.
It sounds like great. So one of our listeners said sounds like a good read, and it does. It certainly does. So Mindy, it's been wonderful having you, and thank you so much for filling us in, and we'll be keeping tabs on this issue as it develops.
And thanks so much for having the show.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. All right, Mindy. All right, so another Let's Have Words, all done. So we cover a lot of topics here on Let's Have Words, and we are not afraid to tackle some really important stuff. So we encourage people, if they would like to be on the show, or you have a suggestion for somebody we could contact. We're always looking for people to interview. And we cover everything from the mundane to the profane to the profound. And like I said, we're not shying away from controversy. So please contact us at the website again. That was up on the screen for a second ago. I saw it. It's wwhrmedia@gmail.com. Please write us there, and we will be glad to entertain that possibility. And in the meantime, keep the lines of communication open. Good night.
Let's have words. Let's have words. Say what it's all about. We're gonna say what it's about.